Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Butterfield. I'm the director of the John W. Kluge Center, and we are co-hosting today's remarkable event with the American Folklife Center. Welcome. We're here today with the authors of two new books to discuss the remarkable career of Sidney Robertson, New Deal era woman who did remarkable work collecting and bringing to our own time a record of the soundscape of the Great Depression. Now, our moderator for today's event, Nicole Saylor, is director of the American Folklife Center, and beginning shortly, she'll be able to take questions from you and from our online audience. But for the beginning, we'll have an opportunity to have a conversation with our two authors, to whom she will introduce you now. Please join me in welcoming them.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Kluge Center, for this opportunity. We're really excited to talk about Sidney Robertson Cowell today. All right, so today I have the pleasure of facilitating this conversation between two scholars, each with a new book out, which you can buy and have signed later. They've spent a considerable amount of time in the American Folklife Center archives on the trail of one of my favorite 20th century folk song collectors, Sidney Robertson Cowell. Sidney's achievements as a folk song collector during the New Deal era and beyond were remarkable and will be the focus of the afternoon's conversation. So first, please welcome Sheryl Kaskowitz, who began her research on this book during a 2016 Kluge Fellowship at the Library of Congress. She is a writer, editor, and audio storyteller based in Berkeley, California. Her new book is titled A Chance to Harmonize, How FDR's Hidden Music Unit Tried to Save America from the Great Depression, One Song at a Time. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so this book traces the story of a radical New Deal experiment to use music to boost morale in government homesteads in rural areas across the country. In only about 2 years, the music unit would amass more than 800 songs until they were shut down by a conservative coalition in Congress that deemed the whole homestead enterprise dangerously socialistic. While figures such as Charlie Seeger and Rex Tugwell figure prominently in this story, Sheryl gives ample attention to the on-the-ground stars of the music unit, and that's music director Margaret Valiant and folk song collector Sidney Robertson. Please help me welcome Cathy Kerst, who was hired in 1989 by the American Folklife Center to assist in assembling archival materials from the California Folk Music Project. She served as a folk life specialist, archivist/cataloger at the center for 27 years. Cathy's book, California Gold, Sidney Robertson Cowell and the WPA California Folk Music Project, picks up the story of Sidney where Sheryl's book left off. So when the project was started in 1938, Sidney was in her mid-30s with several years of collecting experience earned during her time at the music unit. Her project to collect songs from Northern California, the project she conceived of and directed, was the first large-scale government-funded folk music survey and yielded an astounding variety of musical traditions. And on a personal note, Cathy was my first introduction to the American Folklife Center. More than 20 years ago, I was a Parsons Fellow at the American Folklife Center, and I worked with Cathy to learn about Sidney's songs that she recorded in Wisconsin. So then, as now, I find Sidney's story captivating, complex, and foundational to not only providing us with a critical look at 20th century folk music traditions, but she championed an ethnographic methodology that widened the lens of collecting and focused on the songs that were relevant to and alive in communities. I'm thrilled to see these two scholars bring such critical attention to Sidney's work. Okay, so a little bit about how we're going to do this today. We are structuring today's conversation around a series of clips that Sidney recorded. They're not chronological, but instead they jump back and forth in time to help illustrate the challenges and rewards Sidney faced in the field and highlight the ways her approach was revolutionary and resulted in some of the richest ethnographic documentation of that period. Okay, so let me start out with you, Cathy. How did you get started on research that culminated in your book?
Is it on? Is it? Okay, great. I came to the library as a folklife specialist in the American Folklife Center after receiving a PhD in folklife studies at George Washington University in 1989. For my dissertation, I had written an ethnography of a Danish-American celebration based on folklife fieldwork conducted in a small Minnesota community on and off for about 5 years. Once I arrived at the library after my degree, my first task was to assist in gathering together archival materials belonging to the WPA California Folk Music Project collection, an effort planned, directed, and carried out by folk music collector Sidney Robertson from 1938 to 40. Attention was being given to these materials because this collection had been chosen to be the American Folklife Center's first American Memory Project collection. In the 1990s, the American Memory Project that had begun as a digitization effort eventually became an internet-based archive for public domain resources on the library's website. At the time, I had never heard the name Sidney Robertson, nor knew about her vast New Deal folk music collecting activities and recordings. What I remember is that I was immediately mesmerized by the array of documentation that I found in the library, in addition to the 35 hours of recorded music she collected in English and many other languages. There was correspondence, WPA field reports, snapshots of performers, drawings and sketches of their musical instruments, and much more, documenting what people in Northern California from different cultural backgrounds were actively singing and performing during the late 1930s in their diverse communities. Okay. Most captivating for me personally, however, was the pervasive and prominent, even outspoken voice of a singular young woman, Sidney Robertson, doggedly curious about traditional music and eager to share in her writing her far-flung adventures in chasing after it. I discovered that the envelopes and boxes sent to the library following the New Deal held reserves of riches that revealed perceptive musings regarding Robertson's methods of finding performers, recording and interacting with them, and her thoughts about the hands-on and sometimes frustrating mechanics of collecting traditional music. So much of this rang true to me after my own recent fieldwork leading to the dissertation. Once the California Folk Music Project collection was processed, cataloged, and scanned, it was published online in 1995 on the library's American Memory site. During subsequent years as staff member in the American Folklife Center, I worked in many other capacities, but I was always delighted to be introduced to researchers interested in Sidney Robertson. And I'm pleased to say that there are now a whole array of wonderful collaborative Sidney researchers who have explored and uncovered new aspects of her work, resulting in several books and articles, and lots of enjoyable talk and much gossip about her life and her work. Sheryl is one, and Nikki is another. And then, once I retired from the library, I decided to return to my own fascination with the WPA California Folk Music Project and Sidney's work to create it by doing a more in-depth study of it from a new vantage. This has resulted in my book, California Gold, that has just been published by the University of California Press.
My turn. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. It's just such a joy to be back here at the Kluge Center. I was here, it feels like a long time ago, in 2016. And as Kathy said, my journey towards learning about Sidney happened in grad school. I was studying ethnomusicology at Harvard, and I wrote a grad school paper on Sidney Robertson Cowell, who at that time was known in musicological circles as the wife of Henry Cowell, the composer. And there was very little written about her that wasn't written by Kathy. And so I ended up getting in touch with her by email. She was so kind and shared so much information with me. And then time passed, and I was reading about the Kluge Center and thinking about how dreamy it would be to start a new project here at the library. And I thought about Sidney's earlier recording, because I knew that Kathy had already gone really in depth with the California Folk Music Project, but I had learned about her earliest recording was for the Resettlement Administration. And I thought, well, maybe I could go and listen to those recordings and, see what I can find and talk about the recordings and the music. So that's how I came here in 2016 at the Kluge Center with a carol in the Library of Congress, learning all the ins and outs of the tunnels and listening to the recordings and diving into the correspondence, and started asking questions about, it wasn't just about the music and the recordings themselves, and certainly Sidney, but why? Why was she recording folk music for the New Deal government with this organization called the Resettlement Administration? And I started digging into that, and out fell my book, basically, 7 years later. And it really tells the story, not just of Sidney, but of the New Deal, this basically radical experimental program that was wanting to use music to promote cooperative thinking. And so the recordings they anchor the story, and it's just so much fun to be back here and be able to share them with you.
Terrific. So, Sheryl, will you ground us a little bit in the technology of the day and just how challenging it was to do what she did?
Yes. So I haven't been able to find a picture of, Sidney at her machine, but this is the only picture I could find of the machine that the Resettlement Administration bought after some intercession from FDR with the budget office saying, just let them have a recording machine, it's fine. And you can read more about that in my book. So it was designed by Charles Garwick. It weighed almost 150 pounds. You can see there's that handle on there, so they called it portable. And it was recording on aluminum discs. And so Sidney and others who were using it were packing that she made sure that it fit in the trunk of her car. And she drove alone on these unpaved roads through the Appalachians and across. She got as far as Missouri on her very first trip. And so I just want to read a bit. Do you want to hold it, Kathy, while she reads? Oh.
Kathy with an assist.
I can hold it.
Oh, it's okay. So Sidney was actually very, she was really interested in the technology and learning it. And so I'll just, so when she found out that she was going to be able to go on a solo recording trip, so this is November 1936, she met with an engineer in the Sound Preservation Division of the National Archives to discuss some of the technical aspects of the Garwick machine. Among other details, he told her the current must be alternating with a 60-cycle frequency, and that the best way to determine what current is used in a new town is to call up the local electric company and ask. He showed her many of the finer points of running the machine, how to tell when the pulley wheel needed to be adjusted, to tighten the screw on the control switch, and to use Vaseline if the turntable needed greasing. So I think it's really important for us to realize what it means, right, to go out and record. And so her very first recording session was in Ligonier, Pennsylvania. let's see. When I set up the machine, there was a microphonic howl, such as you've never heard, nor had I. That's she wrote in her report. And so she had to reschedule the recording with the fiddler Tink Queer and his band. So here it was. Now it was Tuesday evening. The banjo player wasn't available. One of the guitarists couldn't meet until 9 p.m., and another said the Elks Hall, where they were going to record, was too cold and asked to meet at his house instead. So at the appointed time, Sidney unpacked the microphone and the recording machine in the tiny living room of the guitarist's modest home, with the musicians gathered around awkwardly. She set the machine to record, the stylus cutting its groove into the rotating aluminum disc, and signaled to the musicians to play. Here, finally, was the music she'd imagined encountering, joyous old-time fiddle tunes, complete with stomping and dance calls that she described as fine, dancey music. But unforeseen technical difficulties continued to plague Sidney and Tink Queer's band in Ligonier. She wrote in her report, a little before 11, a bakery nearby started up its electrical dough mixers, and the intermittent disturbance made recording impossible, to the great disgust of the band. So we can play, let me advance. So this is a recording they did called Sharon. So you can go ahead and play.
Can you play the clip?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was great.
Yeah.
All right. So Kathy, can you elaborate on some of the challenges that Sidney faced in the field and the relevance of what she captured for the library?
So here's an image from the WPA California project where Sidney is making copies on a Presto recording machine, also an instantaneous recording device, in 1938. This is the next generation. This was a lot more portable than the Garwick. But it's very hard to encapsulate the field research that Robertson conducted in the year and a half of WPA support for her recordings in California because it was so far-flung. Sidney crisscrossed the roads of the Bay Area and Northern California daily, always on the lookout for performers to record. I'd like to focus on her attempts to find gold miner John Stone. An elusive performer, by reading a bit from a WPA report she submitted about the experience. She always traveled in her car, as Sheryl has said, often with a dog and sometimes a companion, and even if she were alone, would sleep outdoors on the side of the road or in her car if it was too far to get back to San Francisco from the mountains for the night. Robertson was especially eager to locate a famous country fiddler named Johnny Stone she had heard about and had left word for him at the Cliff House Lodge in Groveland in Tuolumne County in the Sierras and told them that she was trying to make contact with him. She finally met up with him several days later. Here's her report to the WPA. Returned to Columbia hoping that John Stone would have appeared. He had left word for me, it turned out, to say he would be coming in from his mine in 2 or 3 weeks. This, of course, was of no use to me. So I drove out and, escorted by 2 high school boys from Columbia, walked a mile down the mountain, poled down the river 3 miles on a raft to his mine after dark, and actually met Johnny Stone, whose existence I had begun to doubt. He said he had no fiddle, couldn't play a note, and never knew a song. So we chatted about other things, and I got up to go, much disappointed, because I was sure he was being modest. As I was about to go out the door of his shack, he suddenly pulled a harmonica out of his pocket and gave the liveliest and most amusing version of the Arkansas Traveler I have ever heard. I was enthusiastic, and he finally agreed to meet me in Columbia. This is the first time I ever pursued a folk singer on a raft. I hate to disappoint you, but I am not going to play the Arkansas Traveler, as he called it, for lack of time, but there is a link to it on SoundCloud in my book, and it's also on the Library of Congress's website, American Memory. It's not called that anymore, but what was the American Memory website. I, however, would like to play a recording of a snippet of a conversation between John Stone and Robertson that took place when they eventually met in Columbia a few days later. I hope you can understand the recording. I've made a transcription of it. Thanks. For you to read on the PowerPoint. Please play it.
That's something very interesting. Now, anybody record their song and voice way years to come, you know, why they should be heard, even by their grandchildren.
That's the idea.
Yeah. They'd be after them kind of records. It'd be a great demand for them kind of records.
I imagine there may be, the government is going to keep these, kind of keep them on ice, you might say. And they can never be sold. They never can make.
Oh, I see. They
money
can't.
out of it.
Can they reproduce from it?
Well, they can. It costs about $20 to make the mold from which they reproduce. And they've never had enough money to do that. They just keep these. And I suppose that eventually, 100 years from now, they may raise money enough to do that, or there may be a less expensive way of doing it.
I was thinking that this microphone could
You
be,
can cut it off now. Thank you.
No.
This remarkable interchange that Sidney recorded elucidates both Stone's very perceptive questions and his curiosity about what Sidney's recording project was all about and how she explained it. Many of the New Deal initiatives, such as this one, serve to validate the musical traditions of exemplary yet so often unsung Americans in radical ways. They also preserve the creative artistry of those they recorded for future generations, and we're almost at the 100-year mark now. Something Sidney had in mind when she engaged the Library of Congress and UC Berkeley as WPA co-sponsors for her project. In conceiving what she wished to accomplish, she was adamant from the very beginning that these recordings that she collected in California would be deposited here at the library for posterity.
Thank you, Kathy. So Sheryl, will you get us started talking about why Sidney's methodology and approach were so unique for the time?
Sure, yeah. I thought...
Something very interesting.
Oops. Sorry. I thought I would start with some recordings that she made of Emma Dusenberry. Some of you may have heard of her. She was a legendary folk singer known to have this massive repertoire of songs. And in her travels, she wanted to go, she found out that although the collector John Lomax had been out to her, to Mena, Arkansas, and collected from her, she had sent him away, Sidney said, because he was rude. And so I think that really connects to part of what Sidney learned about collecting and what made her a little bit different. She actually was sent on an apprentice trip early on by the Resettlement Administration with John Lomax and another collector named Frank Brown, who was at Duke University in North Carolina. And she talks about things that she learned about collecting from that. She wrote, "I came to the conclusion that the collector's visit to make records should be a social occasion, never a business one. All the social amenities should apply with particular force. In general, I think it is best to avoid any suggestion of being in a hurry, and anything like a crisped, business-like manner smacks of the city and will defeat one's end. Dr. Brown," that's Frank Brown, "always called to make an appointment a few days ahead of time, no matter how arduous the trip, and I feel this should be the invariable rule. She approved of Dr. Brown's method of paying musicians by discreetly tucking $1 in their hands on his way out, unless another amount had been worked out. And Lomax told her to expect collecting to take an average of about 1 record per hour, allowing time for driving and chatting. But much of what Sidney learned on the trip seems to have been by negative example, especially in terms of how to treat people. On several occasions, she took note of how the collector's behavior affected the musicians. She quoted a Mrs. Burkett, who was clearly annoyed when Dr. Brown insisted she sing a song that she had told him she didn't know. Quote, "You going to get me into a snap here in a minute, such as I won't sing more for you at all." That's what Sidney wrote. She noted that the banjo player, Mr. McCoffey, resented the overlong session Dr. Brown insisted on, although he was too well-mannered to be rude. She thought more attention needed to be paid to a musician as a human being, not simply a carrier of songs. She wrote, "The collector is, after all, in the position of one making a favor, and he should be alert to the fatigue of singer and player and return another day if necessary. Nothing worthwhile ever came our way when insistence had passed the bounds of good manners. At this point, music making becomes a business, and the collector has defeated what should be his primary aim, the continuance of a live folk song tradition." For Sidney, the interaction between collector and musician should never be merely transactional. She wrote, "While music is being recorded, I felt that the collector should listen and enjoy it to the full, and avoid fiddling unnecessarily with his gadgets. In one way or another, he must manage to seem to participate in the performance, not only to profit from it, if only by sharing the feeling of the performer about the music." She continued, "The collector should definitely take on the responsibility of preserving the love of music making for its own sake. He can do this if he will see to it that he doesn't so cut himself off from the performance as to become audience, someone observing something from the outside, which is of no real importance to himself." So let's just play. This is an example that I listened to from Emma Dusenberry.
Bounce a cymbalin to diet, link a to diet, link a to day. Bounce a cymbalin to diet, link a to diet, link a day. Hamalingo, here we go, hamalingo, here we go, hamalingo, here we go, to diet, link a day. Gentleman motion to diet, link a to diet, link a to diet.
Thank you. Okay, so Kathy, can you expand on Sidney's work with new groups, immigrant groups?
Approximately 24 hours of the 35 hours that Robertson recorded in California were collected in 16 European and Middle Eastern languages. She told her WPA staff frequently to, quote, "remember that the Anglo-Saxon music, which we are inclined to think of as the only American kind, is a relatively recent importation on this continent," reminding them that the Portuguese and Spanish have been in California 3 times as long as the Americans, or the quote Americans. By the early 30s, immigration to the US had declined, and there were harsh and restrictive laws limiting the number of immigrants, and public racism and xenophobic rhetoric had become more pronounced, which is evidenced in a lot of the recordings that Sidney made. She was also fully cognizant of this social and political environment, even when it was a lot more muted. For example, the Society of California Pioneers, who had supported her in applying for the WPA project, were much more interested in the recordings of the Sons of the 49ers she located in the Sierras, who represented the Anglo heritage of the gold rush, rather than the many other cultural groups who also rushed to the gold fields in the mid-19th century. She also felt a hesitancy in the WPA administration, both in California and in Washington, to support her foreign language recordings wholeheartedly. In a November 1954 letter to a friend, Sidney lamented the situation she had found in the late 30s. She wrote, "My field work among foreign groups was always financed with great trouble and expense by myself. I sometimes had money for equipment and materials from the WPA, but never for travel expenses. There was support for English language materials, but not for the other ones. Though Robertson knew that her visits to record communities of the foreign-born was viewed with some suspicion at the time, her resultant documentation provides a fascinating cross-section of song and music of the time that otherwise would never have been collected, and much of these groups had never been recorded at the time either. Her determination to do this was from the start, because as a native Californian, she was well aware of the rich and diverse musical culture in the state. In her instructions to workers prepared for the California project, she details her suggestions for interacting with and recording performers from other cultures. In a way, it's a outgrowth of what Sheryl was mentioning about how to interact with your performers. This was in keeping with her very strong sense of ethics in working to find and record the music that she was most interested in. For example, comments like, "A few minutes of general conversation, don't scorn the weather," as a topic, should always precede any explanation of the reasons for your visit. A casual, friendly, unhurried manner is disarming. A busy, efficient one creates suspicion. But I find these instructions to workers, the sensitivity of working with foreign language performers, very sensitive and very ethical, considering the time. In the Fresno area, Robertson recorded a good bit of Armenian music, including selections of incredible loss from the Armenian genocide, tender love songs, and songs about the beauties of Armenia, but also about life in America. Robertson was quite impressed with Reuben Baboyan, calling him an unusually fine singer with a wide repertoire. I'd like to play a recording of his.
Bostoni hayachikner jan nazanam yares Bostoni hayachikner hay nazanam yares Dr. Pasta Panguzen hay nazanam yares Dr. Pasta Panguzen jan nazanam yares Fereznoi achikner hay nazanam yares Fereznoi achikner
I should have prefaced the recording by saying this is a dance song where the singer makes fun of Armenian girls in America who turn up their noses at farmers and laborers like their own fathers and want only professional men, doctors and lawyers, or even Ford salesmen for husbands. No farmer for her, but a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. The lyrics incorporate the names of American towns where Armenians had settled. You might have heard Bostoni, Fresnoi. These kinds of recordings are quite remarkable. Just how Sidney was able to capture immigrant songs, but that they remembered from back home, but also that they had developed in the U.S.
Thank you, Kathy. Sheryl, could you elaborate on Kathy's comments and talk a little bit more about how Sidney followed her own interests and where that led?
Yeah, I thought I would. So it did. Okay. I thought I'd talk a little bit about her interests in protest songs from labor protests, because I've found that some of the most interesting. It was also the most controversial, and she had to keep her recordings really under the radar. So many of the memos and reports from the music unit were maybe somewhat surprisingly marked confidential, just because they were trying to keep away from the critics of the agency, of which there were many. But she was especially careful with what she ended up recording from protesters, labor union protesters. So I don't have a picture, for example, of that. But she, the Resettlement Administration, as I think I mentioned, the focus was on using music focused on its social use. And so what came to mind for her was the labor movement's use of music. And so although her main goal on her recording was to go out to the communities, either the communities where these government-built homesteads were, or the communities where the people came from, record songs that they all connected with, and then bring those back to the communities themselves. But so she was mostly in rural areas. But she took a side trip to St. Louis to record a group of labor union activists, and I'll just read a bit from there. So there was a painter named Joe Jones, who was a radical activist, and he put out the word among his contacts in St. Louis about Sidney's presence there. She was interested in recording the kinds of songs that they were using in their protests. Sorry. Sidney included the full lyrics to a song that's popular among the girls in the Garment Workers Union, as she said, and other central trades, sung to the tune of Rockabye Baby. Below these lyrics, she urged, "Sing it over once to that naive, lilting tune and see if you don't think that's a beauty. The girls adore and are perfectly aware of the light irony and contrast between the bitter words and the childlike tune." The session helped Sidney understand which songs work best to mobilize a group, causing her to reconsider her bias against using well-known melodies. She wrote, "All but 4 of the songs were set to familiar tunes. I used to be rather scornful of the tendency of radical groups to adapt a familiar song instead of writing their own. But since I've begun to learn how many of the songs we think of as folk songs have been built up in just this way, I see these songs in a new light." So I think part of it is just showing her growing understanding and widening of the definition of a folk song. So we can just listen to this whole thing.
Rockabye baby, rockabye baby on the treetop. When you grow up, you work in the shop. When you get married, your wife will work too, so that the rich will have nothing to do. Rockabye baby on the treetop. When you grow old, your wages will stop. When you have spent the little you save, first to the poorhouse, then to the grave.
Love that. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question, and that will be pointed to Kathy, and then you all can ask us questions. All right. So, Kathy, unlike some of the
Rockabye baby, rockabye baby.
There we go. Okay, so my last question relates to what makes Sidney's work unique, in that some collectors of the time were trying to find rare English ballads in some remote part of the country. She was very open to and interested in what were the songs that people were singing in the moment. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. I'd like to play a song that Giuseppe Russo sang for Sidney in Martinez, California, in Contra Costa County. Mr. Russo was known by his family as Joseph W. Russo. He performed Sicilian and Italian songs, at times accompanying himself on the piano. I'm going to play a song which is a lighthearted, fast-paced tarantella reminiscent of songs found in Italian comic opera. Sidney seems unaware of the openly risque and bawdy nature of the song in a language and with dialect terms unfamiliar to her. This was the case for many of the foreign language materials she recorded. In it, the singer tells his sweetheart that he gives her his heart, but he wants a lot more than a kiss in return. By playing this selection, I would like to bring your attention to Sidney's openness to recording what people wanted her to hear and wanted to record for her. Unlike some early 20th century folk music collectors who had stricter ideas about what they would or would not record, depending on what their idea of what a traditional song should be, and also which genres were not of interest to them.
Napoli bella stinga, sto cuore rugna te, tu dammi un basile, ti voglio bene ne. Napoli bella stinga, sto cuore rugna te, tu dammi un basile, ti voglio bene ne. Io non voglio basillo, son cerillo, piano pianillo da voglia ziccà. Tu mi baciaste e poi t'arraggiaste e poi mi dicevano annivene ca. Io non voglio basillo, son cerillo, piano pianillo da voglia ziccà. Tu mi baciaste e poi t'arraggiaste e poi mi dicevano annivene ca. Uscita pecceri, o fosse pecceri, tu dammi un basillo, nannina mia ven ca.
I should mention that for my book, I chose a representative sample of songs from all the groups that Sidney recorded, including this song. Of course, I didn't know what it was about before a Sicilian ethnomusicologist had done a translation and transcription, and he was frankly embarrassed by the lyrics, he said. So, you know, there certainly things that Sidney didn't know that were going on in this song, and might be part of the fieldwork process as well, where sort of a young 36-year-old government song lady comes to town and asks for Sicilian songs. He was going to sing it for her. And anyway, in 1938, Sidney wrote an article for the San Francisco Chronicle that I feel summarizes some of her core sentiments and the reasons she had for collecting what she did, documenting the lives of so many otherwise unsung performers. She writes, because our history in California is yet so young, we are far more aware of the roads, our dams, our crops, and our bridges than we are of those intangible accretions which have built up our modes of thought and of living. We use the word intangible a lot now as folklorists and ethnomusicologists. It's fascinating that she uses that word. She then reminds her readers of the diversity of California's population, drawn for centuries from the 5 continents and the 7 seas, as she says, and that California still draws farmers and agricultural workers of all kinds from the Middle West and the South. And then she writes this, which I have transcribed for you, and you can read, basically saying, what were these successive waves of hardworking citizens thinking and feeling as they worked here? Their songs will tell us if we can find them. So let's see, and to conclude, just to say a little bit, I'd like to say that Sidney's achievements in her field work, her approach, and what she recorded illustrate some of the very best of New Deal values. An emphasis on community and the acknowledgement, the documentation, and support of Americans from all cultural backgrounds, immigrants and all.
Thank you. All right, let's open it up for questions. Do we have any questions? Threw a lot at you. Yes, sir.
Was the intent of these recordings just to record them, to preserve them, or was the intent to release them as recordings and it got truncated by Republicans, or what? Because I wonder how this fits in. I've never heard any of these recordings, but the later recordings of Harry Smith and all the ones that Mose Ash did, it's all now Smithsonian Folkways. Why have we never heard these?
Such a good question. Who wants it?
Well, I can take the early part. So the Resettlement Administration was making them to use, and they were very specific about them not being commercial and that they wouldn't be shared. And they, I think that they wanted to distinguish what they were doing from some collectors who would go into these remote towns and pay somebody $1 to record, and then they'd sell their music. And so they were just trying to completely separate themselves from that, I think, and the ethics of that. And perhaps, I mean, I've had a couple people say, well, you know, the WPA was paying musicians, so why not, you know, think of these as something that they could be compensated for and release the recordings? But that wasn't what they were thinking. For resettlement, it was very much they called it the scientific use of the U.S. government.
And I think for the California Folk Music Project, I think it was a little bit different. I mean, the project came to, well, I should mention that Sidney applied for a second phase of funding from WPA because she wanted to record the Asian recordings, Chinese, Korean, Bengalis. She had already made lists, and she alludes to that. In fact, there are a few scale drawings, technical drawings of some of the Asian instruments. She was hoping to do that after this, but really by that time, by the early 40s, WPA was no longer in favor. There was a huge, Congress, you know, federal support for the arts and all of that. I think that is, in a sense, still sometimes a struggle. Ended up sort of squelching it, and the fact that she had recorded foreign language materials, that was also not seen necessarily as something to be lauded. So those recordings came here to the Library of Congress, and luckily they did. And then they were recorded on reel-to-reel in the 1960s, and then digitized, you know, in the early 90s. And I think, yeah, I just think it was sort of different in some senses from the resettlement. And the times had changed, the war was coming, there were so many things going on.
Thank you.
So the next question comes from the online audience. This person asked, did the politicians who shut down the funding for this project refer to the content of the songs, like labor songs, as a justification?
So not specifically. The content was kept hidden, and in fact, the labor songs were completely under the radar, aside from the fact that they were later cataloged and easily findable here at the library. But at the time, they were very much you know, kept off of the official record. But it was, for the Resettlement Administration, it was just eventually, after the 1936 election, there a coalition of Republicans and Southern Democrats kind of worked together to push back against the most progressive aspects of the New Deal, of which the Resettlement Administration was one. And so no one found out about what they were doing. And I don't know how many people even knew to listen and try to find these recordings. You know, so I think of them as sort of being hidden in plain sight at the American Folklife Center, because you really I didn't even know what I was going to be finding when I started. So,
Thank you. Are there other questions?
Hi, I'm Tony Seeger, and both of your books are wonderful. I've read them both, but there were others besides Sidney Robertson who were sent, and so can you give us an idea of the scope of the project? How many people like Sidney were sent? Of course, she was one of the very successful ones, and many others didn't do what they were supposed to do. But could you say something about that? Because this was a moment in American history in which it was more than just one or two people. There was a real effort to send people to record and to shape the culture of American communities.
yeah, absolutely. Do you mean within the Resettlement Administration? So yes. So I guess I hadn't mentioned that the program, the music unit, was run by Charles Seeger,
A relative.
Pete Seeger's father, Tony Seeger's grandfather. And so he also did some recordings, but most of them were more local because he was busy in the office in Washington. There was, and Margaret Valiant is another person who I talk about in my book. She did a lot of the actual music activities on the homestead. So I talk about how she went to Cherry Lake Farms and just sort of used music to help build morale. And she found this whole musical culture there that she could then kind of foster. And so she went down and recorded some of the musicians that she found on the homestead itself. And yeah, there were others. Rupert Hampton, who had been involved in the Highlander School that some of you might know about, was collecting songs before they had the recording instrument. So he was like writing them down by hand, and then Charles Seeger would choose from some of those and distribute them as song sheets. So yeah, I mean, Sidney's story is just one piece of what my book talks about. And then you have all of the other kinds of, folklore collecting that was happening at the time. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, Herbert Halpert and Zora Neale Hurston, Ben Botkin. There were all sorts of people working to collect, and well, Alan Lomax, too, that we've heard a lot about. Though, I mean, he was very active in collecting during the 1930s, though didn't really work on a significant WPA or New Deal project that I know of. So there were other people, of course, who were recording. And actually, most of these people, for instance, when I said I had never heard of Sidney Robertson, I hadn't. It was these other people that I'd heard about, Botkin and Halpert and the men, often the male recorders, but also, I mean, and Sidney was also very aware of the Native American, I mean, the wealth of Native recordings around the turn of the century done by women. I mean, I think the bulk of the early Native American recordings here in the Folklife Center were recorded by women. So she was very aware of that. Yeah, Marjorie Edgar. I mean, there were all kinds of people that she was aware of as well, and in contact with, and corresponding with often, or arguing with.
Yes, really. All right, so we're going to take one final question. I do want to let you know that both authors will be signing their books, and there'll be a little reception afterwards, so you can catch them with any follow-up questions. But one last one. Right there.
Hi, we had that great question about why these recordings weren't released, how they had a different function. But I'm wondering about the process in the 1990s of putting them online and nowadays we think, oh, are the recordings online? It's just a sort of natural question that we ask. But in the 90s, nothing was online. And this was the first big collection that we put online. And the question, I guess, is twofold. First of all, what was that like? And secondly, why this collection? Like, what was the philosophy behind making this one our first?
I've wondered a little bit about that myself, because it's a big, beefy collection. I mean, thousands of pages of transcriptions and correspondence and field notes and so on, and then 40 hours of recordings in all of these languages. I mean, it took a long time to catalog, and at that time, the library actually had language specialists that they don't have as much nowadays, as I understand. And so there was a lot. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly who made that decision, but I wondered as I was, I loved working on this material and it was really exciting, but I wondered why a smaller, more self-contained Folklife Center collection could have been chosen, just because this involved so many moving parts.
That, you mentioned that the ones that are the best known are the men, and yet the first one that got, that kind of exposure was made by Sidney. So that's
right.
an interesting development as well. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Thanks to the Kluge Center. Thank you to Sheryl and Kathy. It's been a real pleasure. Please join us.
Thanks so much.